So I'm Kimberly Weefling, and thank you for being here. I used to be a scientist, project manager, engineering person, but now I just do the touchy-feely crap. So that would be turning managers into leaders and groups of people into real teams. Tonight, you're going to hear from three people who I'm sure contribute much more beyond technical leadership. Ron Lichty, he's been such a great contributor to our SVELC core team. Debbie Meredith, thank you. Gosh, there are other women in technology. Isn't that a reassuring trend? Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And Mark Himmelstein. And at the end, you'll have a chance to ask some questions and win some books from at least two of these three people, all right? And they're going to introduce themselves, which they can do much better than I can. Ladies first?
No, we're going to have Ron go first.
Oh, beast before beauty. Here we go.
Absolutely, beast before beauty. So, both of my co-panelists have been interim VPs of engineering much longer than I have, but I got my VP of engineering idea for this at this group. So I wanted to start because it was in 2008 when we were still called the Engineering Leadership SIG, or maybe we were even still the Software Engineering Management SIG of SD Forum, that Jane Davinsky was on stage because she was one of the very few interim VPs of engineering in the world, which there are still, as far as we can tell, only 4 or 5 of us. And she was up there because she wanted there to be more of us. And that's partly why we're up here today. And what she did was to inspire me. She wanted others to become VPs of engineering, and it turned out I was the other. And I had been promoted to a vice president of engineering in a Fortune 500 company 7 years earlier. So it was Charles Schwab. I had been, and there was a but to that. In 2001, .bomb came along, and in the period between 2002 and 2008, I had seen how difficult it was to get rehired as a VP of engineering. So I had some interesting jobs, but I also had some interesting gaps in employment, and that was compounded by what I experienced to be ageism. Some of you in the room will have experienced ageism of. It got harder every year I got older. And I had at one point considered the possibility that I would never be hired again. And so here I was, and I was leading engineering at the time in 2008 for a couple of lines of zone alarm of checkpoint systems software. When I was listening to Jane, but the other thing that Jane said, she described her role. And I thought, this is what I want to do. This is totally what I want to do. I have, since my career began, been parachuted into companies. I've been hired into companies to fix things, to transform chaos to clarity, to fix things, actually, to get software development humming. And there's an end to that, and I didn't really enjoy it after I got it humming. I liked fixing things much more than I like running humming organizations, and I think that's contrary to what most VPs of engineering feel. I think most of us, aside from me and maybe my co-panelists, most VPs of engineering like running humming organizations, and so there's a real role there to step in and fix things for the next VP of engineering to come along, or multiple different ways that might happen. In those periods, and I also had the advantage that in between periods when I was employed, I had done a few very serendipitous consulting gigs. So my former boss at Apple had brought me into an engagement in which we were advising a billion-dollar merger in Europe on how to deal with their technology organization. A former employee of mine at Apple who had become a VP of engineering, in his network, that VP of engineering brought me in when he found out that I knew a lot about Agile to train his team, and I began training teams in Agile. And one of my co-chairs was the best practices SIG. Mark in to talk to our best practices SIG in Oakland, and software development best practices SIG, and one of my co-chairs was doing some an engagement in which that startup was struggling, and he brought me in to work on that. So there were a series of things. So I want to note two things. One, these were people in my network, or people who knew people in my network. So that's a recurring theme for me in consulting, is that gigs for me have come through my network just as jobs came through my network. It's pretty consistent that the reason relationships last longer than jobs, as Kimberly said. And so a bit of history. So in 2008, so a bit of history. So I started out as a programmer in the 80s. I loved being a programmer. And I thought I had the best job in the whole world, except there was one job that I wanted to try, which was managing. And I was a programmer in a two-person consulting company. And you don't manage in a two-person consulting company. And so where would I want to try that? Well, there was one company that I really wanted to work for, and that was Apple Computer. And Apple Computer made me an offer to come manage. It turned out to be a product management group. Back in the days when nobody knew what product management was. And it was figuring out product management for development tools. So I spent a little bit of time there, and I went back to being a programmer. As soon as Apple blew up my group, I went back to being a programmer, and then they made me a manager. And as soon as they blew up that group, I went back to being a programmer, and then they made me a manager. And then I was like, okay, this is they want me to be a manager. I actually sort of like this, and so I got the real luck of getting to manage the group at Apple that developed the UI of the Macintosh Finder. I went from there to Berkeley Systems and managed After Dark, the screensavers in games. We probably had more eyeballs on our entertainment software than anybody else had at the time, and I got to manage that. I got to manage a startup inside of Fujitsu, so an entrepreneurial startup inside of Fujitsu, the very first online animated virtual world entertainment software that was originally developed by LucasArts was now being developed in its third iteration by Fujitsu, so I get to manage that. A totally in chaos organization in the engineering side that brought me in to fix that. I got to then go to a startup in which the founders and VCs were figuring out ways to take each other down, basically. So I got the whole startup experience after that. And then I went to Schwab at the dawn of web trading and got to bring up the first investor tools in Schwab. So I had this wonderful management experience, each of which was figuring out how to solve problems and translate chaos to clarity and make software development hum. And so when I was listening to Jane, it just really felt right. And I thought, okay, so I've got to begin. How am I going to do this? How am I going to transition from being full-time? So I'm really interested to hear how Debbie and Mark did it, because my transition was, okay, I've got a bunch of stuff I have to do, and this resume thing that I've been passing around as an employee doesn't seem like that makes sense to me. And I started thinking about it and thought, okay, so I'm going to create one page that sort of describes who I am. And that's sort of like a brochure, and I sort of invented this thing. And then somebody said, oh yeah, that's called a one sheet. I thought, oh, so I invented this thing that exists. That's really cool. And as I was doing that, I got interviewed by a company to be a full-time VP of engineering. It was a startup, and I'm in the interview process, and I'm one of a bunch of candidates for VP of engineering, and I'm thinking, what's my chance of getting this? It's, I'm pretty good, but there's a bunch of other people out there who are pretty good, and it suddenly occurred to me, wait, what they really need is an interim VP of engineering. They really need an acting VP they really need a consulting VP of engineering. And I walked them through the
I'm pretty sure I sold them, except that about that time they were a startup, they blew up and didn't hire anybody. But and then to my great luck, one more full-time employment came along, which was with Stanford. So Stanford had rolled out a company that published online academic journals around the world. And I spent 2 years at Highwire Press, which was Stanford's publishing arm that published 1,500 plus websites for academic journals for the Royal Society, the American Medical Association, and the Journal of Biochemical, all those long names of scientific organizations you see quoted every once in a while. So we published all that stuff, and I spent 2 years there and spent a little bit, and felt a real sigh of relief of, oh, I've got a little bit of time to develop this stuff. So I developed my one sheet. It took me 6 months. It got a lot of feedback. I came out of Stanford and turned my one sheet into a website. I had been working for 6 years on a book with my co-author, on this book with my co-author, Managing the Unmanageable, and we spent 2 more years and finally finished it. And I came out ready to finish the book and start consulting. And so I've been consulting since 2012. I suspect my practice is different from Debbie's and Mark's in that mine is a portfolio consulting practice. I do interim VP of engineering work. I do advising work. I think all three of us do both of those things. And I also train teams in Agile. I also mentor VPs of engineering and CIOs and CTOs, which is like 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. So that's not a lot of time, but it's a portfolio of stuff that